The independent circuit's a really interesting thing when you look at it. Oftentimes you have the overly artistic, overly pretentious, and sometimes just downright overly ambitious films making their rounds at the major festivals, such as Sundance, Tribeca, and Cannes. However, there will come a time when a studio will see a particular film and hope that it'll appeal to the slightly cultured but still technically mainstream audiences, and so they pick it up for distribution. Such was the case for Fox Searchlight when they picked up this film that's brought to us by the same people who gave us Little Miss Sunshine and Juno. Bear in mind, this is the studio, not the director. With that said, let's get started with this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, the first thing that I really have to point out is that this film felt like they were really trying to recreate the same aura as Little Miss Sunshine, but they didn't quite have a good understanding of what made that film work. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is a downright bad film, but it's definitely a case where you can tell they were trying to recreate the same sort of style, but they were missing a few of the key components, such as the dysfunctional but realistic dynamic between the family members. In the case of this film, we're given a fairly likable main character, but that dynamic, we don't really see it. We don't really see it established, we don't really see anything grow or change or anything in terms of how he relates to his family, which I understand is probably not the point given how this film actually plays out. On top of that, a lot of the problems with this film are kind of boiled down to the writing. Like I said, they do a good job of giving us a likable main lead and some downright repulsive and annoying side characters, but then there are other characters that they serve no purpose in the film whatsoever. They're just there to add that extra bit of venom that isn't even really necessary. As a result, the beginning comes across as a tad unpleasant. However, I'm willing to dismiss that more as artistic license because the main character that we're given is your typical antisocial 14-year-old, and so I'm willing to kind of dismiss the whole unpleasant nature of it all as a way of making us empathize with the main character and understand his point of view. However, that doesn't necessarily excuse the fact that, again, there are some characters that really have no place in the film and don't really serve much purpose. The film really begins to pick up when the main character runs into Sam Rockwell's character, because you have all the other adults that are kind of like, oh yeah, we're party animals that just go off in the middle of the night. Whereas this guy, he's a laid-back party animal, but at least he's not as, well, over the top and as zany as the other party animals that were shown earlier in the film. At least his type of laid-back attitude seems fairly realistic. And frankly, that's the character who pretty much carried the entire movie, to be honest. So it's after those two characters meet that things really start to take off, because then you start to actually see the world seem a little more balanced. However, another problem that I kind of gotta give it is that the drama and the Aesop the film was trying to get across felt forced. I mean, I understand you're trying to kind of bring resolution to the film somehow, but even if you're going for the typical unresolved style of conflict that is done in independent films and was done really well in The Kids Are Alright, it definitely could have been done a little bit better in this film, because a lot of it's just a case of all this drama essentially unloads a drama bomb on us, and there's no real resolution or sense of closure for any of it. So while the film does get off to a bit of an iffy start, it did win me over by the end, primarily because of Sam Rockwell's performance, and particularly the characters at the water park. Basically, those characters felt a lot more real than the outside world characters that we're introduced to. Now, I understand you're trying to kind of create this sort of dichotomy, but it wasn't executed very well. Although I still enjoyed the film, it's not something I would recommend to just anybody. I mean, if you're able to stomach the very indie feel this film has, because this definitely feels like an independent film. So if you're able to stomach the indie feel, then it's worth checking out if you've got the time. And given that it's just a 2D film that's being distributed by Fox Searchlight and it's an independent film, then, well, you don't expect to break the bank while viewing it. So that said, on my personal scale, I'm giving The Way, Way Back a 3.5 out of 5. Why 3.5 out of 5? Well, like I said, there were some characters that were unnecessary. The writing could have been neatened up in a few places, and the beginning and endings were just kind of especially with the drama towards the start of the third act that was supposed to kind of lead to the resolution. That felt mostly forced and could have been neatened up a little bit. So that's it for this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. As for next week, I'll be taking a look at The Conjuring. See you then.